I am excited to talk about OpenAPI 3 today. As someone who is working on a new company building APIs, has been an important specification and made my job a lot easier. So I wanted to just give a little intro and talk through how exactly it makes my life easier. So for the agenda, I'll talk about why OpenAPI 3 a bit. I'll talk about my experience building API integrations across different fintech domains. I'll talk about OpenAPI 3 specification, its history, its use cases. I will do a demo of some OpenAPI 3 tools, and then I'll wrap up at that point. So let's talk for a second about financial APIs. So some of the most popular financial APIs out there, like the Stripe API, which enables you to make payments online. And so this API has enabled, all sorts of new use cases for payments in the world and in apps. There are also open banking. So Plaid, Finicity, these APIs allow you to connect to bank accounts and programmatically exchange information. But all of these together can really enrich our lives as individuals and also our lives as businesses by enabling that kind of quick transport of data, and then enabling new ways to look at things like underwriting. So understanding someone's financial history, some alternatives to our traditional methods of underwriting, for example, and then other financial instruments as well. And so that's what I am building, and that's why I'm interfacing with so many different types of APIs. And I've encountered, quite a bit of difficulties with that. And OpenAPI 3, whenever I have a specification for that, has made things a lot easier. So let's talk a little bit about RESTful APIs for a second. So in general, this is kind of your basic setup for a CRUD API. So you will have 5 methods. So a get, a post, a put, a patch, and a delete. And get should give you a list of that object back. So in this case, if you have slash products on the path without the SKU on the end, that should give you back all the products in that collection. If you add the SKU to the end, then that should give you the one product. Post will allow you to create products. So you should have some body that corresponds to a product, and you'll be able to create that. Put would give you an update, a complete update. So you are replacing and that SKU with a new SKU, but keeping the same ID. Patch would allow you to update one field, so a mutation of that data. And then delete would allow you to delete that data. So this is kind of the philosophical idea behind the HTTP and the REST APIs. However, the reality is that people don't all implement this the same way. So some ways that this can go wrong and that API design can be hard are small things to big things. So let's talk about some of the small things. So let's consider someone who believes that instead of making this plural products, that it should be product. So that's one way that they can do it. There also may be some APIs that believe that this is kind of too robust and too many methods. And so they might make a post API for everything. So there might be post, slash products slash delete. And then that would kind of take over the same effect as a delete HTTP method. Or you may have the patches and the puts and the gets all be implemented in posts as well. Furthermore, you may not want to use the path in order to pass the SKU ID. So you may pass it in a header. You may pass it in a body. And so as someone who's integrating with an API, you get used to the pattern that you see, and then you go to another API and they follow a completely different pattern. And so reusing your code, doing things in a way that is modular becomes very difficult and strenuous. And so OpenAPI 3 is an attempt to, one, standardize on how these APIs should look, and then two, provide some ecosystem around these APIs, so consuming them is a little bit easier. So OpenAPI 3, what it is a protocol, or I guess more specifically, a machine readable, language agnostic, and open protocol for REST APIs. So it's a way to describe RESTful web APIs in a machine readable and language agnostic format. And so what do you get in return for that is community. So once things are machine readable and language agnostic, many tools will pop up. You get an ecosystem. So you get a wider array of tools. You get them being interoperable, which is the last point. And as far as the lineage or the composition of OpenAPI 3, what it is essentially JSON schema to describe the JSON objects that are being passed around over HTTP, and then some other, you can call it, syntactic sugar to explain the rest of things that can happen, in a web API. And you might wonder like how this relates to Swagger. So Swagger actually is you can think of it the grandfather of OpenAPI 3. So essentially Swagger was kind of the initial attempt to do this, and then it spun out into something that was more generalizable, which is what OpenAPI 3 is. And Swagger and OpenAPI 3 are kind of mostly compatible with each other. You kind of find places where they aren't, and it's a little bit frustrating. So that's that. So let's jump into a demo of some of the OpenAPI 3 tools. Okay, so what I have here is Replit. So some of you probably have worked with this, but essentially I'm just going to go through 6 different tasks with different OpenAPI 3 tools. So first I'm going to start by taking an OpenAPI 3 specification and then consuming it and converting all the endpoints into TypeScript interfaces. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can create your own specification, what that looks like. Then I'm going to take an existing OpenAPI 3 specification and generate a mock server out of it. So based on the spec, I simply will run a mock server and then be able to run some commands against that over Postman. Then I will talk about how you can take an OpenAPI 3 spec and then turn it into like a nice documentation that you can share with either your customers or friends or colleagues. Then talk about generating a Postman collection out of an OpenAPI 3 spec. And finally end with generating an SDK. So this is specifically a TypeScript SDK. And yeah, TypeScript is just what we've been using for the company. So it's kind of the thing I'm the most familiar with at the moment. So before I do any of that, let's just take a quick gander at one of these specifications. So this one is one that I borrowed from this lady named Lorna, and she's trying to make this API that allows you to retrieve planets in the solar system. And so in this API, you can see she's got an OpenAPI 3 specification version. She's got some description. And then here are the paths. So there's a get and for planets, so /planets, and then there's a get with /planet/ID. So pretty straightforward. Describes kind of what you can expect from the API. And one nice thing here is that it also gives these examples of what the values can be. And that comes in handy when you're trying to generate a mock server. So without further ado, so we're going to start by consuming this OpenAPI spec, actually a different one from the planets one. So this one's kind of wordy. So what this is a CRM, so a customer resource management API. It's pretty long, but effectively we're just going to take this, which is like multiple method API, and then just turn it into some schemas that we can use in TypeScript. So we'll do that with this tool called OpenAPI TypeScript, which just takes any valid spec of OpenAPI and then turns it into TypeScript schema. So let's copy this And so yeah, we'll just run that. Might ask me to install this. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so 1 second. Oh, I think I have a typo there. Sorry. Okay, so that created the schema.ts file here. And so for each of the endpoints, I've generated these different interfaces for in TypeScript. So I've got this /crm/leads endpoint, and that's a get operation. And there's also a post operation for that. And then I've got these different webhooks. I've got the interfaces that are specific to the regex that they're described with. So for example, this needs to be an ISO format for time. And then I've got all that just kind of read directly from that OpenAPI spec. And that just continues forever. It's a pretty long API, so I won't make that too long. But yeah, so pretty simple. This would work in any language. There's tooling, for this, all because you have, the specification that describes this API so well. So we'll skip through this. We already kind of talked about this API. So we'll move on to mocking. So we are going to mock that planets API that I just showed, and need to install that too. Okay, so what this is going to do is going to spin up a web server on port 8080, and then in Replit, it basically will forward port 8080 to this domain here. And so from that, I can make a GET request against this. So I'll come over here to the Postman and then make a GET against planets. And then you'll see here that I get a planet Saturn back. And then also there's another API endpoint where I could do an ID. And so I'll also get planet back for that. So so simply, like, I didn't write any code, and then I've got an API that kind of just works against that specification, which could come in handy if you're working with APIs like I am all day. All right, so let's do the next one. So okay, so next we're going to spin up some documentation. So I'm going to use this tool called Redocly, which takes an OpenAPI specification, all the examples, and then provides a nice page for you to display your REST API. So let's do that. Okay, so basically this whole API is described in that doc, and then what you get is this page here. So it has all the notes, explains the headers in your API keys, and then if you come down to the bottom here where the actual API is, so it'll give you any kind of authorization parameters. It'll give you some examples of code, so you can do Python or Java, and it will kind of automatically generate how this code should look. It gives you all your responses, and it's pretty solid, for just auto generating it. And as you get used to using Redocly, you can generate nicer and nicer pages. And Redocly isn't the only tool that works with these OpenAPI 3 specs. There's several, but this is kind of one of the nicest and sort of easiest to use ones. So it's one that I recommend. All right, so let's keep moving here. So the next one, we're going to generate a Postman collection. So let's see. Let's actually just close this web view. I won't need that anymore. Move this over here. And okay, so we're going to take that same example spec that has a CRM API and make a Postman collection. So then we'll import that into Postman afterward. Okay, so that was saved in this temp directory. So we got temp converted CRM API.json. So we'll download that, and then we'll open up Postman, import new collection, and sweet. So now we've got that full API in Postman, and then if you can add any of these, default values as well, and add a Postman environment if needed. So that's an easy way to get started if you were, trying to consume a new API. Okay, and finally, we're going to generate this SDK. So we're going to take that same example spec and then generate an SDK for TypeScript from it. Okay, so now we've got this SDK.ts. So this is effectively an SDK that you can import and start using that implements this entire API. So it's got all the types, all of the methods, and exactly to the specification that was written. So let's go back here. Okay, so these are all the benefits that you can get from OpenAPI 3. So testing, being able to mock, being able to use the integrations in the ecosystem. And I think the most important, the sanity. So having a way to describe an API and letting kind of all the heterogeneity happen, from however creative people want to be in defining their APIs, but still having a way to describe it has made my life a lot easier. Being able to import the Stripe API as a spec or the Plaid API, just makes my life 100 times easier. And so I really, really love this tool. And if you haven't used it, I hope that you get a chance to. And that's it for me.